Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us. We're coming to you live tonight from our office in Pittsburgh, the city of bridges. My name is Terry, and I'm a University Program Specialist at Google.
And I'm Brittany. I'm a University Tech Recruiter here at the Google Pittsburgh office, and we're really excited to be here today to chat with all of you and answer all your live questions.
So today we'll be spending about 20 minutes talking about how to navigate a tech job offer. We'll cover what to consider. We won't be able to answer specific questions about specific offers and compensation, however, so please save those specific questions for your individual recruiter. We'll spend the last 10 minutes or so answering your pre-submitted and live questions. Thanks to our wonderful chat moderators, April and Karen, who are here to answer your questions too. So let's jump in. Brittany, we know it's very exciting to receive an offer from your dream company, but that excitement can soon turn to confusion and feeling overwhelmed by this big decision. How can candidates be sure that they're making the right decision for themselves?
Sure. I think this is a great question and certainly one that I can understand. I think some things to consider when evaluating job offers would include what does the corporate culture look like? What's the type of work that you'll be doing? Where is the offer geographically located? And of course, I think the reason we're all here, compensation. So let's start with corporate culture and tackle that first. So this would actually refer to the beliefs and behaviors that determine how a company's employees and management interact and handle business transactions, Terry. Often corporate culture is implied, it's not expressly defined, and it develops organically over time. So ideally, corporate culture, it should align with one's own personal beliefs and values when considering an offer. Secondly, I think something that's pretty important is the work. So is the core work of the company that you're considering interesting to you? Do you see yourself growing at this particular company and being successful, doing this kind of work? I think also something to take into consideration is that in the tech industry, teams and projects can certainly evolve over time.
Sure.
The geographic location of the offer is something to also consider. So a job offer in an area, is something to take a look at. Do you see yourself living in this area for at least the short term? And then I think, it's good to ask your recruiter, are there opportunities to relocate in the future? So asking questions around internal mobility might be good to, just run past your recruiter. And then, of course, compensation. So there are many different components to your offer package, and you should consider all of them thoughtfully and thoroughly.
So on the topic of compensation, can you help to break down the components of a typical tech offer?
Sure. Do this probably daily. So happy to break it down here for all of you. So it can be a little confusing to hear all of these different numbers and acronyms as you're talking with your recruiter. So let's start with just the base discussion of what is total compensation. So this would include base salary, annual bonus, and equity. So comparing total compensation is the best way to look at two competing offers. So in addition to base salary and equity and bonuses, some companies offer, healthcare packages, free food, 401k, many other perks and benefits that you'll want to chat with your recruiter about. You might uncover some really cool things that, again, align with your core values and may help with making your final decision. So, for example, Google offers some really incredible resources and options for folks who want to give their time as a volunteer or to donate funds to a nonprofit organization or to continue their education. We have resources for that as well.
That's a really great suggestion to consider all of these additional benefits that companies offer. Can you explain a little bit more about equity? Specifically, what is equity and how can I compare the equity being offered at two different companies?
So, this is where it can get kind of confusing for folks that, are looking at offers at two different companies. So there are two common types of equity. You have restricted stock units, often referred to as RSUs, and options. So it's a really good idea as you're communicating with your recruiter about your offer to ask, what am I receiving? What are you offering me? Is it restricted units or options? So to dive in a little bit deeper about the restricted units, they're compensation awarded to an employee from an employer in the form of stock. So this would be distributed or given according to a vesting plan or schedule. So most stock isn't given entirely upfront in the first year. The vesting plan releases the stock in increments or vesting schedule plan. So normally you'll see it over the course of a few years. So you'll want to ask your recruiter what that vesting schedule looks like and how that releases. Now an option, and that's the other form, this is a form of equity that's given to an employee to buy stock in a particular company at a discounted or fixed price.
So is there a difference between equity in a publicly traded versus a privately held company?
Great question. I think that's honestly a question I get from a lot of the candidates that I work with. So comparing equity among publicly traded companies and privately held or pre-IPO companies is not like making an apples to apples kind of comparison. It's more like looking at apples to oranges. So let's dive into a publicly traded company. So if the company gives you a grant of equity, it's often, like I mentioned, in the form of RSUs. With these restricted stock units, these shares are given in a grant. So you don't have to purchase them. The share price is typically public. There's a documented vesting schedule, as we discussed, and the shares become liquid after they vest or become yours. So liquid is actually a term that means that you can do with them what you want. You can sell them, you can trade them, but in some way or another, they turn into cash in your hand. So lastly, with the equity of, and I think this is really important, with the equity of a publicly traded company, you can review the stock history and trajectory. So you can go back, depending on, the length that the company has been around, you can go back, 5 years, 3 years, and having this analysis can aid in just the overall evaluation and worth of, future equity.
Sure.
So let's dive into what we would consider the oranges. So this would be the privately held companies or pre-IPO companies. So this is a little bit different to consider than, the publicly held. So privately held companies typically grant equity in the form of options, which this would be the opportunity to buy the company stock at a discounted price or a set price. Typically, the set price is also known as a strike price if your recruiter is talking to you about that. If they're not, you may want to ask what that is because it's really important. So private companies also tend to have the same kind of vesting schedule or vesting plan. It might not be exact same years, but a schedule at least. So you'll want to ask, what is the release of that equity? Typically, options in a privately held company are not liquid. So that's one of the main big differences between the two. So this means you can't exactly sell them for actual dollars until the company has an exit event.
Thanks for explaining the difference between public and private equity offers. I know that can be a little bit confusing, so hopefully that was helpful. You must also get a lot of questions from candidates at this stage in the process. So kind of switching gears a little bit, can you share some best practices for students as they're just working with their recruiter?
Sure, certainly. You definitely want to maximize, your relationship with your recruiter. I would say the first thing that I would recommend to our audience would be transparency. So your recruiter may ask you, are you interviewing with other companies? And you should tell us. It's totally expected, and it'll help us to put you on the most appropriate interview time schedule to see, if we can accommodate the deadlines that you may have from other companies. Be transparent with your recruiter. I think about your motivations, what's driving your decision-making process, your schedule. Tell us what's important to you and how you're going to make your decision so that we can help you in the end in making that decision to deliver on those things. The second thing I would say is communication. So you may want to ask your recruiter how they like to be contacted, whether that would be instant message or ping, email, text messages, phone calls. You should ask them the same to make sure you're on the same page in terms of communication. I think it's also important for candidates to even take ownership of the communication, right? If it's Friday and your recruiter said they were going to get to you by 3:30 and they haven't reached out, feel free to send them over a friendly email reminder, that a follow-up is due. Often recruiters are working with hundreds of applications. So it's also on the candidate's onus to stay on their radar, Terry. And then my last tip, and probably the most valuable tip that I can give in the relationship with a recruiter, is it's always important to be mindful and respectful to your recruiter. This is a relationship with somebody at a company that you're considering to work at. So oftentimes students may treat recruiters as if they're someone who's working for them instead of with them. So please don't make this mistake. Be respectful of your recruiter. The goal that you have with them is mutual, and that's to get you a job.
Yeah, that all makes so much sense. It's so important for students to realize that recruiters share the same goal, and we're all here for the same reason. So the last question that I have for you, Brittany, is what are your tips for students when they're going to negotiate a job offer?
I'm sure that this is one of the things that our audience is here to certainly hear. So don't wait until the night before your offer decision is due, to talk to your recruiter about what's important to you or to start negotiating the offer. I think it's really important to also revisit those core values that we talked about, the work, the culture, to determine what is important to you, before you even start in the process, but also revisit those at the end. Tell your recruiter, what are the things that are important to you so that they can try to deliver on those. Like we mentioned, some of the perks and benefits. Take the time to ask the recruiter, those important questions as well regarding 401k, retirement plan, equity, the work, the corporate culture. Those are all really important once you start that first job. And do your own research. We understand that these are the first times you may be hearing some of these things. So you may want to look up, what 401k actually means. Like I said, we don't expect you to know everything, but this is your offer. You certainly should do a little research to understand what you're signing up for. But if you do decide to negotiate, it's helpful if you have data and justification. And by data, I don't mean just quoting numbers, of a salary that you found online, because those numbers might not always reflect tenure, location, and other factors, and aren't always the most accurate. So having data means that you've done the math based on the offer that you have in hand or the other competing offers, that you may be holding on to, and you've stepped through the total compensation to see where you may have some gaps. So I think, justification doesn't necessarily mean, you're coming to your recruiter saying, well, my friend got this, and I think I should get this too. So do your homework, evaluate the total compensation, and come to them with a realistic negotiations. Which that's kind of my final point here. Be realistic. Negotiating an offer isn't like negotiating for some other things where you just throw out this pie in the sky number and hope that your recruiter or the comp team is coming back with half of that. Some companies may not be able to negotiate some of those numbers. So you'll want to kind of tune in and listen to the recruiter, as to where they're saying they can budge. Some people might ask about PTO or healthcare. So this might also not be an area where, a company or a recruiter is able to have movement. So touch in, listen to the recruiter, ask them, where the movement is and work with them in that area.
Yeah, this seems to kind of come back again to the relationship that a candidate might have with their recruiter to be able to have those open and candid conversations.
Certainly.
Great advice, Brittany. So you all submitted some really thoughtful questions, so we'd like to get to a few of those now. We're going to start with some of the questions that were pre-submitted, so we'll just dive right into those first. So the first question that we received is, should you negotiate your first job offer out of university?
Sure. I think it's often a really scary thing to dive into with a recruiter. I have folks tell me that they're nervous all the time. Recruiters are open to students chatting with them about this. So don't be afraid, be open to the conversation, and be comfortable with it. So you should certainly, try in an effort for yourself.
Good. Next question. Do you need to have multiple offers in order to be able to negotiate?
So I think if you have multiple offers on the table, just like we've discussed in this live chat, do the math, gather the data, and come to the recruiter with a justification as to why you're asking for what you're asking for. And I would say if you have multiple offers on the table, come with what your two best offers are so that the recruiter can understand what you're looking for. And again, this goes back to the transparency, the communication, may not just be comp, but maybe some other things like the work and stuff like that that's important to you.
Okay. So this is a little bit more a question about kind of timing. So when you're dealing with accepting an offer, is it okay to wait a week or so or more maybe before you go ahead and accept the offer because maybe you're waiting to hear back from another company or you want to discuss the offer with your family or your friends before you make that big decision?
Sure. Typically, offers come with deadlines. If you don't know what yours is, you should definitely ask your recruiter. But I think kind of discussing with the folks that are in your corner, helping with your decision-making process, whether that be professors, family members, mentors, they would be important to kind of weigh in on your options and help folks, with making the best decisions for themselves. But with regards to the deadline, you definitely want to, read the offer, see what it actually says, and follow up with the recruiter if you have any questions there.
Perfect. Another question we received is, should I fear the company is going to rescind their offer if I try to negotiate?
Okay. I would say no. This, I think, would be bad practice in the industry for any company. Although it can be a scary topic to enter in with a recruiter, I think, this gets back to respecting the relationship. I think if you come in a respectful way, there should be no fear, of coming to, the negotiation table.
Sure. Another question we received is it reasonable to request an extension on an offer deadline if you have other interviews scheduled in the future that you need to complete?
Sure, great question. I think it's reasonable, but not all companies may be able to accommodate it.
Sure. Yeah, so again, just open conversation. Another question here, if you have two competing offers and you have to choose one of them, obviously, how do you tell the company whose offer you've chosen not to take that you won't be accepting the offer?
Sure. And I've been in this situation myself. I think the best way to kind of handle this tricky situation is to follow up with the recruiter personally, either over the phone or send them an email. One, say thank you to them for all of the hard work that they put into your offer and taking you on that journey. And two, ask if there's a way to touch base. And, you always want to end, these professional emails on a good note or messaging on a good note.
Sure. Keep the door open, like we like to say. Okay. So a few folks in the chat were asking where you are able to view internships and full-time Google opportunities. And we can share that you can view all of our available roles at google.com/students. So if you were wondering where to go to apply, again, that's google.com/students. Another question that has come up in the live chat is, how do you make a resume stand out? I can take this question since I talk to students all the time on campus about their resumes. So one thing that's really important and actually often overlooked is to make sure that on your resume, you've taken the time to show that you meet all the specific minimum qualifications for the role that you're applying to specifically. So make sure that you highlight your education, any relevant projects you've completed, if you've had a relevant internship, any scholarships or awards. We really want to show us all of the great things you've accomplished and really demonstrate your passion for the field. So that's a great question, although that's on the application side rather than the offer side. Always good and happy to answer that. So another question that we received from the live chat, and I'll aim this one to you, Britt. What is the best way to ask for a deadline extension?
So I think this goes back to communication with your recruiter. You probably would want to, communicate this in their preferred medium, whether that would be over the phone so that you can explain why you're asking for an extension, what's missing from the offer, something like that. So I would say either over the phone or email so that they have, something to get back to you by, either a voicemail or a documented email.
And would you recommend that when a student sends that communication that they explain to you why they're asking for an extension on the deadline?
I think providing some kind of justification as to why is important.
Okay, good. Another question. Do you think it is okay to cold email a recruiter if you're excited about the company or a job?
Sure. I think it would be fine to email, a recruiter. It may depend on, the company if they can get back to you and move forward in the process. But, I think if somebody is that ambitious to, go out and cold email somebody, it always feels good as a recruiter to kind of have somebody reach out that's interested in your company.
Sure. Another related question, do Google recruiters ever use LinkedIn? And should we have a LinkedIn profile?
Sure. In my years of being here, I have told folks, let's stay connected, on whatever means you use. I think LinkedIn is a great way to stay connected and keep those professional connections kind of going well beyond university with somebody, at a particular company.
Yeah. I agree. Another negotiation related question.
Sure.
How much time should you allocate for the negotiation process once you have your data, for example, a competing offer? For example, 1 week, or does it kind of depend on how long it might take to get through a negotiation process?
Yeah, I could see this varying at a couple different companies in terms of time frame for the folks that recruiters work with to get back to them. So I think this could depend between a couple of days to a week at some other companies to hear back. So this is one of those questions where I would say you want to ask your recruiter what the time frame of follow-up looks like and how long it may take to hear back.
Okay. Yeah. Again, just asking the question, how long might I expect to wait?
Mm-hmm.
If you have accepted an internship offer from one company, but have since received an offer from your dream company, is it okay to turn down the first offer? And how would you go about doing so?
So I think this is a really tough question to answer. This is, somebody's going to have to internally reflect, on this kind of, question. I would say, for an intern, that's something they may want to discuss with their professors and at the school level, their career services department, to see, how to manage that.
Yeah.
And tactfully kind of move through the recruiting process, not burning any bridges or anything like that.
Sure. Yeah. It's obviously not the preferred message that you want to hear as a company who's extended that offer and to a student who's accepted it. But consulting with, someone close to you and kind of dealing with it on a case-by-case basis, I think. Good advice. What type of extracurricular projects should we engage in? This is a great question.
Yeah, this is probably a you question.
Yeah. So some great extracurriculars that you can get involved in include things like hackathons or competitions. Google actually has several competitions like Code Jam and Kickstart. You can look online at google.com/students for more information about those types of events. Also thinking about maybe building apps, on your free time. It's okay to have personal projects on your resume as well. If you're a TA or a research assistant, that's also something that we like to see on your resume. So when you're thinking about it, just think about what am I doing or what can I showcase on my resume that really demonstrates my passion for tech, and that's what we're looking for.
Mhm.
Another question here. So when requesting an offer extension, should you ask for the offer deadline date to be modified on the original offer, or is it enough as a verbal agreement from the recruiter via email?
I think this really depends on the offer the company is coming from. So I always say you want to get things in writing. So probably also something you'll want to get in writing in terms of understanding when is this offer due.
Right. Okay. Another question, is it okay to try and negotiate compensation as a new grad?
Yeah, I think we kind of touched on this before, in the first question. Totally. This can be a scary topic coming right out of school to kind of approach with a recruiter. And, I think you, just like we mentioned, have to handle it in a respectful kind of manner, with the relationship piece with your recruiter.
Okay. Another question, can I apply to multiple roles? The answer is yes. You can apply to up to 3 roles at Google within a 30-day window. So you're not limited in terms of the number, up to 3 applications per 30 days. Another question coming in right now, if someone applies and it doesn't work out the first time, can they reapply to Google, and how long should they wait? This is a question we receive on campus a lot, and you should absolutely apply again. If you did not, make it through the interview process the first time around, there are plenty of Googlers who have interviewed more than once, and so you should absolutely reapply. We do ask that you wait between 6 to 12 months before you reapply to the same role, so that you can have some time to grow in that space and acquire some additional skills before you interview for the same position.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so it looks like we've been able to answer most of your live questions. Our Googlers will stay on the chat for a few more moments, and thank you to them for answering all of your questions. And thanks to all of you for asking such thoughtful questions. We were happy to answer those tonight. Be sure to subscribe to Google Students for more videos about working at Google, and check the links in the description box for helpful resources related to the things we talked about today.
Sure. And visit google.com/students to explore other open jobs and apply to join us. We hope to see your application soon.
Bye.
Thanks.